During the 19th and early 20th century, the Industrial Revolution gave European nations overwhelming military power that conquered every corner of the world. Massive and mass-produced weapons of steel and fire were too much for the military of the other continents, which still relied on human and animal muscles. Countries by countries fell victim to European colonization. But Japan was an exception. Japan not only managed to stay out of the death row, but also became strong enough to join the greedy and inhumane business of enslaving other peoples. Japan under Tokugawa shogunate was a strictly isolated country. It was not until the Meiji Restoration in 1868 that Japan fully embraced Western systems and technology, and started its modernization. And yet just 37 years later in 1905, Japan surprised the world by defeating Russian Empire, one of the main European powers, with its mechanized army and warships. It was possible due to the rapid industrialization Japan had experienced for the previous decades. In less than a lifetime, Japan transformed itself from a feudalistic agricultural country, into an industrial powerhouse that was on par with its former role models. To understand why Japan was industrialized so quickly, we need to look at its geography. As you can see, Japan is an island country, like England. The first industrialized nation in the world, and the first industrialized nation in Asia, are both located in islands. Was it just a consequence? Or living in islands had something to do with industrialization? Island countries had very favorable advantages over their continental neighbors. They didn't need large armies to defend themselves from foreign invasion because their borders were protected by natural barriers of water. During the 17th century, when continental European nations maintained standing armies numbered hundreds of thousands to defend themselves against each other, England didn't even have one. English kings, without armed forces to support their dominance, couldn't build vast bureaucracy to extend their direct rule over all realm. So England didn't have neither standing army nor centralized bureaucracy whose expenses haunted taxpayers of neighboring countries. That meant English people could save huge resources from being wasted on non-productive war machine and ruling apparatus. Instead, they could use these resources in productive ways to make them wealthier, and develop the industry. This was why England, the once poorer country in Western Europe, economically surpassed its neighbors, such as France and Netherlands, and eventually opened up a new era of economic paradigm. Korean people, who live right across Korean Strait from Japan, suffered numerous foreign invasions from nomadic peoples in the north, Chinese in the west, and Japanese in the east, that threatened their very existence. So they needed a strong and centralized military to fend off and survive mighty enemy forces. During the Joseon dynasty that ruled Korean Peninsula from 1392 to 1897, all Korean men from age of 16 to 60 except slaves had to either serve in the army, or pay for the army. Controlling large centralized military forces granted the central government absolute power and authority. With that, the central government created a highly centralized bureaucracy to directly rule all the populace. Maintaining these centralized military and administration structures were a backbreaking burden for Korean peasantry. Many fled their villages, or even voluntarily became slaves to avoid military conscription and taxes. Korean peasants had to support not only the local nobilities, which were the intrinsic component of pre-modern agricultural society, but also a huge standing army and central bureaucrats. After supporting these three non-productive groups, Korean people had very little left to spend to enrich their economy. In contrast to the unlucky neighbor, the last and only time foreign army set foot on Japanese mainland before the American occupation, was Mongol invasions in 1274 and 1281. Both failed due to the logistic difficulties of transporting large armies over sea, and typhoons, which Japanese called kamikaze, meaning divine wind, destroyed Mongol armada. Without serious external threats, Japanese people didn't need a centralized military, nor centralized government. During the Tokugawa shogunate from 1600 to 1868, military and governance were handled by local daimyos, which were the hereditary feudal lords of each province called Han. There were more than 100 of them. By not having centralized military and administration structures, and practicing things at the local level, Japanese people could save tons of resources. Unlike peasants of Joseon dynasty who had to support local nobilities, plus central standing army, plus central government officials, peasants under Tokugawa shogunate only had to support local nobilities called samurai. Local nobilities of Joseon dynasty called Yangban lost their military characteristics and became men of letters because their role as soldiers were replaced by the central standing army. Their governing role as local ruling class was also transmitted to the central bureaucracy. Yangban studied Confucianism and literature from a very early age to pass the civil service examination and become government officials, but only a handful of them actually made their way into the bureaucracy. Therefore basically, most of them did nothing productive in their lives, wasting resources extracted from peasants as land rent. They were truly a parasitic class of the society. In contrast, samurais, the local nobilities of Tokugawa shogunate, retained their role as soldiers and administrators since there were no centralized standing army nor centralized bureaucracy. They were of course, an oppressive ruling class who reigned over people through violence. But at least they did something useful for their income, so Japanese peasants didn't need to serve in the military or pay extra taxes. Japanese people, with lighter burdens on their shoulders, could spend a larger portion of their income on buying goods and services. This made Japanese people wealthy and led to a boom of commercial activities. Even before Japan started modernization, Japan had a highly commercialized economy. Cities grew rapidly as centers of trade. By 1700, Edo, today's Tokyo, was about twice larger than London with a population of 1 million, and Osaka and Kyoto each had 400,000 inhabitants. Merchant class became very rich. Some of them were wealthier than great feudal lords. This table shows us how highly commercialized Japanese economy was by the end of Tokugawa shogunate. Already in 1887, trade and finance represented 33% of GDP. That's the number almost 3 times higher than what low-income countries had in 1958. Japan's commercialized economy was fertile soil for industrialization. Relatively wealthy Japanese populace created strong demands for manufactured goods. Also, they could afford education for their children. Well-educated people provided competitive workforce. Commercialized agricultural sector was very productive. It could support a large number of non-agrarian factory workers. Capital accumulated by merchants and artisans fueled industries that required heavy investment. Japan developed socio-economic environment well suited for industrialization during the Tokugawa shogunate. What Japan was missing were technology and production techniques, and these were relatively easy to be adopted since they didn't require social changes which could take generations of struggles. This was why Japan was industrialized so quickly.